Greg Davidson. I'm CEO, Chief Executive Officer, albeit I probably perform a number of roles, being a typical management IT consulting firm that's got about 80 odd people, and I'd perform probably the major functions for the CFO role, which is probably why the interest of coming to the CFO Summit. My background, strangely enough, is IT, but very soon after I did my IT degree, I got sick of being asked by CFOs and financial controllers, how can you tell me about how to run my financial systems and design my chart of accounts and you're not an accountant? So I went and did my accounting degree and said, well, I'm an accountant now. And that's probably held me in good stead throughout my whole business career. I think one of the major things that probably need to happen with CFOs, and a lot of the strategic CFOs are starting to recognise that now and starting to do that, is leveraging technology to help improve their cost models. I mean, it's really, for the CFO, it's all about business intelligence and knowledge. And if they haven't got that real-time data and that real-time information, it's almost impossible for them to do their job and give guidance to the business leaders throughout the organisation. I mean, there's a lot of things that they need to understand from the technology perspective, and it almost seems as though there's that shift back where the CIO was becoming a direct report to the CEO. A lot of organisations are now starting to realise that the CIO, whilst not necessarily having to report to the CFO, they need to work hand in hand together because it's a mutual mission. So there's a lot of things that CFOs need to get involved in as far as sourcing strategies throughout the business and throughout IT, or whether it should be in-house resources or outsourced resources or that like. And technology models have changing dramatically, so the big talk is cloud computing. The reality is cloud computing is really nothing different. It's been around for 10, 15 years. It's the old bureau services, someone else hosting the environment somewhere else. What has made that come more to the forefront in these days is the physical technology in the last decade has become cheaper. And a lot of people laugh when you say that because they still think it's quite expensive. But if you look at 10 and 20 years ago, to buy infrastructure, all your servers and your network and all your desktops was probably close to 10 times more expensive than what it is now. What has become more increasing cost is they've become cheaper, they've become more complex, therefore you've needed more people and more services, so your services and your resource costs become higher, but the actual infrastructure has become cheaper. And with the introduction of cloud computing, that's really become about, because of that, is so much cheaper, so vendors can be a lot more flexible of how they give you access to that hardware, and the communications have dramatically increased, so the bandwidth that once wasn't there is now there in gigabytes as opposed to single bytes that used to be available, and the cost of that is significantly lower than what it used to be, so it's a real option. The other things is looking at selective outsourcing, and there's been a number of people in the CFO Summit that have talked about selective outsourcing, not only in the IT technology area, but in those business processes within finance. Unilever gave a great example of how, as an international organisation with dozens of companies all over the world, all had totally different finance systems, totally different technology systems, everything was disparate, a lot of duplication, a lot of additional costs, and they knew they couldn't do it on their own, so they've introduced companies like IBM and Capgemini to help them with that process, strangely enough, technology companies. So there's a lot of ways of looking at what your sourcing strategy should be. I would say we typically don't advocate that you outsource everything. There's some expertise that needs to remain in the business, and typically that's more the application areas. The infrastructure side is more commodity driven, so by commodity driven you can swing people in and out, and you've got to provide career paths for especially the Y generation there now, otherwise you end up spending a fortune on recruitment, a fortune on training, and in 18 months time they leave. Whereas if you have the right outsourcing partner, they'll manage that whole process and it'll be seamless. You don't have to worry about it, you don't have to pay those additional costs, they get access to a whole heap of other senior expertise that make the process, you know, seamless. I mean, a classic example of that is one of our early clients, bearing in mind that we've been going for nearly 10 years, was an engineering company called Orbital Engines. And when we first, they had about 350 people, an IT team of 9. And we went in and did a review, restructured them, and did a complete outsource, delivered them 100% service improvement in 6 months with a costed team of 2.6. 2.6 sounds a bit bizarre, but it was 2 people on site, and then we gave them access to about 10 other people that spent a couple of hours to half a day every week on site. And what that meant is they had a lot of roles like the DBA, Unix administrator, system administrator, database guys that they had as full-time people, but they really only needed them, you know, like half a day a week. So we just analysed that and reviewed all that. So a lot of people find it bizarre that you can deliver a better service with less people at, well, in their case it was about $500,000 a year cheaper. So fairly significant. The CFOs, one of the hidden challenges for most CFOs and even technology areas is business continuity plans, because at the end of the day when you get down to doing business continuity plans you can go to extremes, and most organisations when they look at that complete replication environment that, you know, technology falls over one day and it switches over to another place, the cost is horrendous. So a lot of people don't do it, but there's different ways of doing that, and doing that so that your board is covered and you've covered off the risk, you've done the risk matrix, and you've got things reasonably planned without spending a fortune. There's checks and balances that need to happen, not only from an accounting audit perspective. They need to be judging that it's not only your accountant auditors that come in once a year to review that you've done things right from the probity perspective. You should have individual experts coming in and reviewing that your processes are right and your IT structures are right, because you can introduce huge productivity improvements and huge savings well and truly over and above the cost of that. And I think some of the more strategic CFOs are starting to recognise that they really have to do that these days to be seen on top of it, and they've really got to start driving the mentality of financial business cases, that no money should be spent in the organisation basically unless it can be justified as essential to operations or introducing some sort of business benefit. And the managers, you know, it requires a fair bit to build that. And I mean, that's the whole alignment strategy, and I think if finance and technology areas can work together to deliver that, they can deliver, you know, huge collaborative benefits and savings to the whole organisation.